Welcome back to our next session. So we had a really nice overview, I think, by the Protein Allergy Technical Committee on some of their activities and some of their outreach. And so for the next hour and a half or so, we're going to continue, this time giving you a summary of the International Food Biotech Committee of ILSI. So I'm just going to do a few introductory slides to give you an idea as to the organization, and then we will go into having a summary of the crop composition workshop, which was a workshop held last September here in Washington, D.C. Wayne Parrott's going to talk about transcription factors in RNAi. Dean Bushy is going to talk about a task force that we're working on that's called Intractable Proteins, and I'll let him define intractable. And then Ray Shalito will summarize with an overview of the outreach activities. So, hopefully all of you are very familiar with ILSI, that the objective of ILSI is to be a tripartite global network of academic, government, and industry scientists. That's one of the reasons that we're here today, is to be interfacing with this tripartite group of individuals. And I will also just give a slight plug for the website, because I know that the Food Biotech Committee, for example, has all the presentations that were, for example, given at that workshop in September, and also presentations from the recent OECD meeting that was held, plus our papers and others. The mission of IFBiC is to serve as a resource that aids science-based decision-making in food and feed crop safety assessments of GM crops. We do that through two different avenues: developing and publishing scientific papers on the safety assessment of food and feeds, and supporting global scientific capacity on science-based risk assessment. On this slide, I won't go through all the details. You will also hopefully have access. In fact, I guess maybe, well, my presentation isn't on the thumb drive, but it'll be on our website. The objectives for, we shorten the word International Food Biotech Committee to IFBiC, so please pardon me if I use that acronym. But the objectives of IFBiC are clearly to be focusing on science, generating scientific information that fosters dialogue, working through partnerships. And although I didn't include in the presentation today, I have a slide that just shows well over 30 different organizations that IFBiC has partnered with in its last 15 years of existence. And many of those partnerships have been for outreach then, where as task force efforts have been wrapping up, for example, we've organized symposia, workshops around the world on those specific areas, and also responded to requests. Another part of ILSI that may or may not be obvious, but ILSI has branch chapters around the world, and as those branch chapters have requests for information on biotech safety assessment, like for example the workshop that was just mentioned out of China, that was coordinated with ILSI Focal Point China, a branch chapter in that region. Obviously, one of the key objectives is harmonization. There's a lot of diversity in the data requirements for the safety assessment of GM crops, and identifying areas that can overlap and can be shared is a goal, and building capacity. There have been times that, I don't know if Ray Shalito will mention this in his summary, but for example, a few years ago, Ray and I and Wayne, I believe, and a few others were down in Argentina at a workshop sponsored for a week by UN University, where it was a South American. It had representatives from 9 different countries, went for a week, and they even got credit through UN University for their participation in the workshop. And it was a palpable learning experience for the participants at that event. This slide shows our current membership. We are at a balance of public and private sector scientists. I won't go through the whole list. Again, you should have access to these slides. Kate Walker, Lori Bennett, and Pauline Rosen are the staff that have been supporting IFBiC. to give you an idea as to how we are organized, we have that steering group that was just shown on the previous slide that pretty much is identifying both the topics, scientific topic areas, and the outreach opportunities that this committee should be pursuing. And what are shown down in the boxes are that we have had a series of typically, as you can see, task force efforts. And again, I want to applaud Ray Shalito and the steering group itself. We emphasize the word task force. In other words, we identify scientific task topic areas, organize a group of public and private sector scientists to address that topic, and when that topic has been addressed, we then wrap up the task force. So as you can see, our first set of task forces, 4 through 8, have been completed. Each of them have at least one publication. Many times they sponsored outreach efforts over the past years, ranging from 2003 through, actually we still talk about some of the work by those. We have 2 task forces on 9 and 10, 9 on stacked events, appropriate safety assessment of breeding stacked GM products. Task Force 10, the role of mammalian studies. Both of those will have 2 papers each that are either submitted or about ready to be submitted or about ready, actually for Task Force 9, both are now published. I believe they should be on the data stick that IFBiC has. Task Force 11 you'll hear more about in a minute, as well as Task Force 12, so I won't dwell on then. And right now, we've actually had on the books for the last year a task force in that there's a lot of conversations many times around toxic proteins, but as best as the steering committee could tell, there's not a lot of consolidated discussion as to what constitutes a toxic protein. Well, are there any shared properties of proteins that are typically considered to be toxic? And if there are some of those shared properties that might be amenable to a database to have that as an outcome, that task force is just getting started. And then we have 2 working groups. We came up with that distinction a couple of years ago in that some areas clearly are not tasks that you start, conduct, and conclude. I'll start actually with the working group number 2, the crop composition database. That started as a task force. It came from the recognition that the various ag biotech companies always were including conventional materials, varieties or hybrids in their composition studies. How about if we collated them in a manner that, without divulging anything confidential from the companies, would create a robust data set, and that database now exists. It's cropcomposition.org on the internet, and it is just about ready to have version 5 released, which will enable including new crops and expanding the amount of data, and also expanding some of the capabilities like searching by methods. The other working group, sampling and detection, is a long ongoing activity as well by IFBiC that I believe Ray Shalito will be covering in his summary of some of the outreach activities. This slide simply shows some of the completed task force efforts. As I said, there are publications. The publications should be on the data stick, so I will not spend much time since we started a little bit late here on that one. And it looks like I just covered this last slide already. So with that, if there are any questions about IFBiC itself, our organization, or any of these efforts, I'm open to a few questions now. Otherwise, we'll get into the remaining questions, presentations.